imagine yourself being in incredible pain. A depression of sadness permeates from the essence of your being and consumes you. You try to make it go away, but it is always with you, and hope fades as you turn to addiction. You want help, but there is nobody that understands you, and you slip into an induced coma and never wake up. This is the sad ending of many people impacted by the war on drugs. Instead of the war on drugs, we should adopt a policy of medical care to be given to those who are hurting, treating them as patients instead of criminals. After researching this topic, I have come to the conclusion many experts have. The war on drugs is not effective for keeping people off of drugs, and instead a policy of care should take its place. I would like to present an alternative to the war on drugs that we treat it as a social and psychological issue that can be resolved without incarcerating millions of people. Let's begin with the effectiveness of the war on drugs based on arrests. Even with some of the world's toughest drug laws, there has been no reduction in drug use. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world at 670 per 100,000 people, according to the World Prison Brief. If the idea is that stiff penalties are meant to be a deterrent from crime, then we should see a drop in drug use and addiction. However, this is not the case, because even as the prison population has soared in the last 30 years, addiction levels have remained constant. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, in 1984 there were approximately 700,000 drug-related arrests. 20 years later, in 2014, there were double that amount, 1.5 million. If the laws to prevent drug use were working, then the amount of people being arrested would decrease as less people would be using, but instead it has doubled. This means that stiff penalties are not effective in lowering the amount of people arrested for a crime. Now let's look at who benefits from the war on drugs. The main beneficiaries of the war on drugs are politicians who want to remain in power and private prison corporations who profit from the record number of arrests and incarcerations. The war on drugs began with Nixon and his re-election campaign, and they felt the opposition they faced could be conquered through villainization of the two main groups that opposed him. CNN reports Nixon's top advisor, John Ehrlichman, admitted the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Therefore, it is important to understand that the origin of the war on drugs is a tool of oppression. When Reagan was elected in the 1980s with a tough on crime campaign, there was a growing crack epidemic. His solution was to enact tougher penalties in the attempt to dissuade people from committing crime. Corrections Corporation of America, a private prison, was given its first contract in 1984, only 2 years before mandatory minimum sentencing was introduced by the Reagan administration. Perhaps by coincidence, but at the same time private prisons were given their first contracts, people began to be given much longer prison sentences. Corrections Corporation of America has reported in their annual revenue reports a growth rate of roughly 10% every year from 2000 to 2010. According to the Department of Justice, the average prison sentence in 1999 was 8 months, and by 2013 the number reached 23 months. The longer the sentence and the amount of people that stay in prison, the more profitable private prisons become. Therefore, they have a large incentive to keep people behind bars. So let's take a look at who the war on drugs is targeting. Drug addicts are not criminals. They are people that need the help and support of the communities to treat their addiction as a sickness. The comedian and actor Russell Brand explains, the mentality and behavior of drug addicts and alcoholics is wholly irrational until you understand that they are completely powerless over their addiction, and unless they have structured help, they have no hope. We are trying to fix the problem of irrationality with an irrational solution, and since we do not understand how to help these people, we find it easier to put them away. Therefore, the war on drugs is a war being waged against friends, families, and the communities it is mandated to protect. So how do we fix this problem then? I propose, instead of waging war against our loved ones and neighbors, we embrace and offer them the support and care they need to overcome their addiction. The first step is to provide infrastructure for addicts, build rehab facilities, and mobilize medical and psychological teams. Most addicts are hurting in some way, so learning what gives them pain and helping them alleviate it is a more effective way than locking them up. Instead of a criminal court system, people would be taken before a panel that assesses their drug use, tries to persuade them against using, and educates them on the dangers of their life trajectory. What we have to understand is that people will always be addicted because we are not focusing on the root of the problem, their pain. And since we are not focused on the right angle of the problem, we can never solve it. Next, I'll show an example of this idea in action. To see what a country could be if there was no drug war and people were traded for drug addiction as a health and social issue, we need only to look at the Portuguese model. In 2001, Portugal legalized all drugs, and teams of medical professionals coaxed people into quitting and providing them with clean needles and to prevent the spread of HIV and infection. This has had a dramatic decrease in drug-related HIV cases. The New York Times reports that 50% of HIV cases were related to drugs in 2000, while in 2015 the number dropped to only 5%. Nicholas Kristof from the New York Times describes the benefit to this model. Portugal's drug mortality rate is the lowest in Europe, 1/10 of the rate of Britain, and 1/50th of the latest from the United States. From this example, we can see that treating people who need to be helped is a humanitarian and effective approach, rather than locking them up and destroying their lives. Today, I have explained how the drug war is ineffective by showing the number of arrests is increasing over time, proving that people are not dissuaded by stiff penalties. I have offered a solution based on a working model from another country of treating addicts appropriately as patients, which will lower the number of drug-related deaths while educating the population. Treating addicts as patients and giving them the care they need will not only ease their suffering, but help solve a crisis of destruction we are sowing by being complicit and ignoring the underlying issue of pain. Thank you.